going on, everybody? Welcome to the latest LUMIX live stream. We've got a bit more of a kind of intensive walkthrough with the camera menus and kind of feature sets, as the title kind of alludes to. Is, where is that feature in the cameras? So we've got a lot to kind of cover through today. A whole lot covering from both the photography side of using our cameras to the video side of using our cameras. And lots of interactive on actually going through where all this stuff is. So this stream, I guess, kind of really is going to be down to, I've got a bunch of stuff prepared. If you have been looking to say, hey, I saw someone do this one thing on the camera, or I have a question about, how do I enable this feature? Drop it in the chat. Make sure to tag at LUMIX USA. I'm going to go through them. I've got the camera hooked up. I'm using the G9 Mark II since that has the most latest options available in the cameras, and it's going to be relevant to pretty much all of them. So we'll be able to jump through and basically show you almost anything you'd want on these cameras. If it's a feature from a camera that has something that maybe this camera doesn't have, like maybe the timecode stuff on like a GH6, I do have a GH6 here. I can plug that in as well, and we can talk about some of that as well. So, with that, before we jump into the actual topic, I want to give a little bit of an update. Last week's live stream is unfortunately still not available yet. When it got posted and I got kind of saw it on the YouTube backend, it was like really messed up. Something happened there, so I'm still working on trying to get it back to something that is actually worth putting up. So if you just keep watching the space, I'll try to get it posted as soon as I can. But yeah, I'm a little bummed about that one because that was a fun conversation. If I can't get it back up, at least in a way that it kind of cohesively makes sense, because like there are chunks of it that just are all corrupted, I will just probably do another stream about this, and we'll just kind of talk about the lenses and do an updated one. So it may be a little bit of a rehash of that particular stream. So I'm sorry, but honestly, I think after almost 4-ish, maybe more than that, years of doing this, I think the first time we've had something like that happen, and I didn't do a backup recording, so sorry. Yeah, outside of that, if you haven't already, especially now during the holidays, if you've got a camera or you're hoping to get a camera for the holidays, or maybe you've got a camera for friends, significant other, whatever, in holidays, now is the great time to make sure you check out LUMIX Pro Services. In the United States, we have Red and Platinum. Red is the free tier, so if you've got a new camera, especially with the release of the G9 Mark II, make sure to go take a look, get yourself registered on this. You're going to get yourself the back-end support for the 3-year extended warranty, and just the platform that if you need support, you've got a channel for it, and you don't have to go through general customer service. If you are looking for that much higher level of service and support, take a look at the Platinum tier that we offer here in the US. That is going to get you the same 3-year extended warranty, but on top of that, you're going to get the kind of things that you'd expect from a professional level service. You're going to get 20% off out of warranty repairs, 2-day repairs with next day shipping both ways, annual sensor, EVF, lens cleanings, firmware updates done by our team. You also get access to our membership hotline, so if you need to speak to someone 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, East Coast time, you've got access to all of that. You also get a pretty cool welcome gift still, which is a really nice added thing there if you like nicer straps than the ones that maybe the cameras ship with. So yeah, I encourage you to take a look at that. We have links down in the description, links to the global side of LUMIX Pro Services as well, so you can take a look and see if it's available in your region, what tiers are available. And as a disclaimer, every region has some kind of different tiers and requirements based on what they're designed for. In the United States, Micro Four Thirds and Full Frame is available within the program, so have at it. It's a great program to be there if you need and want that added level of kind of peace of mind for your equipment, especially during the holiday season. So, as I mentioned, this is a stream devoted to walking through, finding the features, showing you where they are, and as I mentioned in the description, also kind of clearing up a couple things about real-time LUT and the use of LUTs in the camera, because I've had I think obviously now that a lot more people have been getting the S5 Mark II, it's been ridiculously awesome to see all of the new users picking the cameras up. Even with the G9 Mark II, there's a bit of confusion online, I think, about, what LUTs to use, how to deploy them, things that you may be wanting to kind of keep an eye out for, differences between shooting vlog versus standard profiles. Are you using them for photography? Are you basing them in video? To be honest, the video side typically doesn't have that big of a challenge with it because we've been using LUTs for video for a ridiculously long time. So we're going to walk through that, go through the whole steps of taking the LUT from your computer, getting it on your card, loading it in the new cameras, and then kind of going from there. We also have, before we dive too far into that, there have been firmware updates that have just been posted over the last couple days. So if you own a G9 Mark II, or you've been looking at getting one, I'm going to pull the firmware update page here, and we're going to take a look at it together. The version 2.0 firmware update has been made available for the G9 Mark II. So if we go, there we go, that's the screen. So if we go in, this is the global firmware download page. So I just dropped that link in the chat. This is where you'll be able to get all the information, and we talked about this before, actually with the lens stream last week on this. If your camera has a firmware update, you'll see the camera listed on this page. If it does not have a firmware update, and it's still at, say, version 1.0, it won't be listed here. It's the same for the lenses as well. If a lens has a firmware update that goes past 1.0, that's when you'll see it posted on this page. So, that being said, G9 Mark II has now been updated to version 2.0 firmware. So when we go in and we actually take a look at what that update brings, you'll see this is the raw over HDMI update for the G9 Mark II. So anyone that's really been, kind of looking at this camera, using it in maybe a more video sense there, you've got more choices with this camera now. There's also been some other updates here as well. So improved stability, improved compatibility with various media sources there. As well as some, typical things that get fixed with firmware updates every once in a while. So in this case, the SH burst modes on the G9 Mark II, there were certain instances where you could get a vertical line or two that gets thrown into the image. That's been corrected as well for the JPEGs. So if you haven't already, be sure to go take a look. Follow the link that I put in the chat there. And get your camera's firmware updated. If you use the LUMIX Sync app, you probably got a notification. If you haven't already, remember that those are rolling. So it'll do region by region and kind of go through that process. If you don't want to wait for that, you can do it the more traditional way over the SD cards. But always keep your cameras updated. There has also been updates for the GH6, as well as when we go into the full frame cameras, updates for the S5 Mark II and Mark IIX. Those three cameras, they're more just kind of run-of-the-mill, smaller side fixes with it. Just things that have been brought up to us that we were able to correct with it. So, again, it's always good habit to make sure that you get your cameras or keep your cameras and lenses up to date in firmware, even if it may not necessarily be on the changelog shown 100% what you need in the camera. There are always things in there, efficiencies in code, all that kind of stuff that also, help with general camera performance. So yeah, encourage you to go take a look at that. Links in the chat there. I'll also put a link in the description after the video's posted as well. So all of that out of the way, let's take a look at some of these questions that have come in here. So first one is, where is the feature that shows percent with a number on screen? I think 28%, and what does it do? I saw it on a GH4 videographer screen. It shows in the bottom middle of the screen. Best guess I can tell here is that what you are actually looking at is if you are in either variable frame rate or you're in, say, the slow and quick function on like the G9 Mark II or an S5 Mark II or Mark IIX. That is an indicator to say what percentage of the frame rate you are in. So it's an overcrank, undercrank kind of concept. 100% would mean that you're shooting at, like if you have the camera set to 60 frames per second, that it's actually recording 60 frames per second with a 60 frame per second output. If it's 28%, that could mean that you're doing 60 frames per second or 24 frames per second of your output, but you're recording at, say, 60 frames per second for the video, because it's going to play back at 28-ish% of the speed. That is typically just going to show up only when you're using variable frame rate or the slow and quick function within the LUMIX cameras. Steven says, has the G9 Mark II been tested, and does it have an IP rating? Much discussion about this on the web. So formal IP rating is not something that we do on the cameras. However, we do in-house validations for our claims of weather resistance on our cameras. Part of it, I think, is it's nice to see that number just up until you actually maybe do a little bit of research on what the number actually means as far as what that protection is, and you start to realize that a rating like IP53, which is a common one being used for some electronics, is nothing more than water kind of misting onto your lens and dust protection that is pretty much standard in the industry. So no, we don't have a formal IP rating for the camera. However, we do build and test based on IP's ratings. I don't have a figure that I can give you since it's not something that we do give out. However, I can tell you that in general day-to-day shooting, I have seen how we test for the dust and splash resistance and the freeze resistance in the cameras. And it is right there on par with what is expected in a professional camera body. Whether you're looking at an S5 Mark II or Mark IIX or a GH6, which have the built-in active cooling solution in the fan, or you're looking at something like a G9 Mark II that does not have a fan, but gets the added benefit of like the freeze resistance, since there's one less moving part. So yeah, not necessarily a formal IP rating. A lot of times that's more just down to marketing. People may choose to throw an IP rating on there because it looks cool on a spec sheet. But proof is in the pudding with a lot of this stuff, as it said. Our cameras, I would handily put our cameras up against the other cameras out there. However, major caveat, because this is also the same with anyone that does give that rating, they're not infallible. If you do get water or dust damage with inside of your camera, no manufacturer is going to cover the protection of that. So just kind of keep that in mind. No camera on the market is spec'd to be put under running water. I don't care what demos you see. They're not spec'd for that. And you shouldn't, because that's not what the IP rating is spec'd out on some of those cameras. Let's see here. Johnny says, is the stream from last week still available? I addressed that at the beginning. DJ, sup Sean, just wanted to say Merry Xmas. Hope 2024 would be yours and LUMIX's best one yet. Yeah, we are super excited for 2024 to kick off. We kick it off always every year in a really fun way with CES being the first show of the year. So, hey, if you're going to be out at CES, be sure to stop by the Panasonic booth. Matt Fraser, myself, Neil, a few other people are going to be there at the booth. We've got some really cool stuff, experiential stuff that you get to kind of interact with us on and check out all the cameras and lenses and all that fun stuff. So if you're in Las Vegas, definitely come by and take a look. Chris says, as an aviation photographer, I'd like to see aircraft detection on the G9 Mark II. I can't rule it out. I haven't seen any plans for it, but definitely can't rule out things like that. The more feedback we get about detection modes and stuff like that from all of you, the higher the probability of stuff like that is being added in there. Emmett says, nice shirt. Well, why, thank you. This is from the LUMIX Collective event that we did out in Oha, California. Just basically, it's the S5 Mark II X. Yeah, S5 Mark II X with, like, various different features and all that kind of stuff that's in it. It was kind of a cool special edition shirt I got out at that event, so... Pete says, happy holidays, drop an Easter egg about an S1 successor. Believe me, if I knew anything, I'd be like so excited, but yeah, sorry guys. Doug says, second on the aircraft detection, good to know. Hap says, if one uses SH20 or higher, when the buffer is full, is there any way to continue shooting without lifting your finger off the shutter button? I know this has been talked about on some of the various forums. Currently, the way our system is designed, if you're at SH in any of the SH modes, when you hit the buffer, basically when you fill the internal storage, it does stop the recording and then it starts to dump. So you do have to kind of pump the finger on there for between the shots there. And that's probably not what you want to hear, but that's how that system is. All right, cool. Now we're getting into some of the questions here for how to get into things. So I'm just going to say Al. It says, where and how to best adjust autofocus settings, speed, and sensitivity. This is a perfect question. So in the LUMIX cameras, you have two locations for the autofocus sensitivity and the settings that you have available for tuning it to your particular style. So we'll talk about the photography one first. On the photography side, what you'll see in the menu itself, and let me turn the display settings on here so that we can actually go through what these settings mean. So in the menu here, to start with, if you press the display button while you're going through the menus, it'll pop out maybe like a little bit more explanation of what that option does. So under the photo option here, when you go down, you'll see the focus selection. Now, under this is where you have AF custom settings for photo. Once you go into here, you're going to have 4 presets available that can all be customized. So preset 1, which is how the camera ships out of the box, is designed for a little bit more kind of middle of the road performance, right? If you're doing ultra fast sports, if you're doing wildlife or bird and flight, stuff like that, this is not going to be the mode that you want to prioritize using for those kinds of subjects. But if you're just casually walking around, I find for street photography, things like that, set 1, it's great. It's fast, it's nice, it just kind of works. You don't really have to think too much about it. Then you have set 2, set 3, and set 4. Each of these modes are going to give you what our kind of preset is for those various different styles of photography. Remember, we're talking about the photography side here, with a little description down there. So set 2, really a good example of use case for this one would be trains and airplanes, since they move generally in a constant speed in a singular direction. Not talking about like an air show kind of thing for aviation. When you go to set 3, situations where the subject's going to be moving randomly, they may be moving in and out in front of or behind other objects. So our example here would be things like football or basketball, or say soccer if you're in the US, football if you're globally. And it's more tuned for that. And then set 4, which is the one that I love to use, obviously for those that have been around long enough here, this is the motorsports one. This would be for changing speed and direction really quickly, moving in and out. So car racing, motocross, motorcycles, things like that, you're going to have that set. Within each of these, you have AF sensitivity, AF switching sensitivity, and moving subject prediction. Now, what's nice about our cameras is that if you don't know what AF sensitivity is, just press the display button. It'll give you a little write-up that says this adjusts refocusing sensitivity, and then it tells you what responsive adds to this, so acquiring faster than just kind of letting it sit there. When you go to switching sensitivity, same thing. It'll tell you what AF mode it's operable in. So AF switching sensitivity is a full area AF option, and this is the not switching subjects option there. And then moving subject prediction, this is just how much of the AI side or the algorithm side is used to predict where a subject's going to move based on its path through the frame. So each of these are designed so that you can tune the system to your style of shooting. Main point again there is that out of the box, it's made for kind of general flexibility. When you start getting into those more specialized areas of photography, or videography, that's where you're going to want to go in there and maybe take a look at the different sets. Now, Moving on to video side of this. When we go into the video menu, which is the camcorder icon, or if you have the camera set into creative movie mode, which is the M with the camcorder icon on the mode dial, you also have focus option as well as AF custom settings for video. Now in here, when you go to set, you have two choices. You have AF speed and AF sensitivity. Now again, you can click display, and it's going to read out to you, what the setting does, how it's designed to work, what adding or subtracting from the sensitivity does for both of these settings. So AF speed is going to be that how fast it moves between the subject points. So if I am using, say, one area autofocus and I've got it right on my subject, if that person is running towards me in video, I may want to increase this speed. That's going to make it a little bit snappier, with the trade-off that it's going to look more video-esque, if that makes sense. It's not going to look necessarily like it was hand focus pulled, because it's going to really leverage PDAF functionality for snapping to the point as it moves. But then we also have AF sensitivity. AF sensitivity is how strong do you want it to lock to the subject that you have selected. So if you're using human detection, I want to have the box on this person, it is locked on that person, and I want it to stay on that as strong as I can. Excuse me. So I want to have that stay on that subject as tight as I can and ignore something passing between me and the subject as best it can. This is where you'd probably want to play more around with this, especially if you're a wedding videographer and say you're doing like, the dance, the reception kind of stuff. This is where if you're video using this, you may want to play around with some of these settings. Because again, by default, there is a setting that is kind of designed to be pretty general use case. So someone who's just getting into this camera has a really good experience. Someone who's pro working with the cameras, you know that you're going to want to kind of tweak things maybe to your specific use case with that camera. So we give you all of that option. Big thing, remember, you can click display on each of these while you're in these menus, and it's going to give you a little write-up that explains what that mode is and what the adjustments actually do to it. So that was a great question, and I'm so glad that was one of the ones asked there. Another follow-up here was where and how to adjust sharpness and noise reduction settings. So this one actually, I'm going to do this one in two parts because this ties into the real-time LUT conversation and LUT loading, so this one's going to be a little bit longer. Don't worry, at the end of this, I am actually going to timestamp this. I actually have time now that we're about to go on holiday break, so I will be able to actually go through all of this stuff and get some of that stuff. But okay, so where you change things like sharpness and noise reduction and say contrast, depending on the profile you're in, is going to be by going into the menu, going to either photo or video. Now this is going to be a universal change between photo and video, so it doesn't really matter which menu option you do this in for adjusting the photo styles. They will carry the adjustments you make between photo and video. But what you would do is say, here I'm in standard color profile. What I do here is when I scroll down, this is where I can change contrast, highlight curve, shadow curve, saturation, the hue that's being applied to it, the sharpness, and the noise reduction. Now, there are additional things that you can do, but it'll depend on the color profile that you're in. If you noticed at the start of this, I was actually in the My Photo Style options. This is where, from a photographer's standpoint, you have a lot more flexibility over the color and profile that you want to create in the camera. This is that side of the conversation about some of the confusion that users have, or especially new people getting into the system, about LUTs and how do you actually use them. So under the My Photo Style options, these are where you can customize your own look in the camera and have it saved separately than the baked in versions that we have on the camera. So when you go to My Photo Style, you then go down and you'll see here I have standard set as the base, but I can choose anything else I want. I can choose L Classic Neo in this case. Then I still have my contrast, my highlight, my shadow, saturation, hue. But then because of this color profile, I have grain effect available to me. I also have color grain available to me as well. Then you'll see is where I have sharpness, noise reduction, and then below that, you'll see they're grayed out right now, but I'll show you how to enable them. I can set a setup white balance and an ISO based on this color profile so that I know that when I change this, I don't have to rethink what white balance and ISO I choose. I just change to the color profile. The last one on this list is where you can apply the real-time LUT function. Now, out of the box, if you were to take a look at this, you can press the LUT select and you'll see that there's only one in here. There's Vlog to 709. But I'm not working in Vlog. Means that at this point, that's not a good profile to use for stills, because if I apply this on top of standard, you get a really punchy, high contrast image that does not look right. And you can toggle them on and off. So how do you address this? So, if you want to actually get full-blown control over your images, you're going to want to start understanding and using things called LUTs, or lookup tables. So let's take a look at my computer here. So we're going to take a look, and I've got an image here that I've captured of motorcycle. Now, as I've said, everyone understands I love motorcycles, I love riding them, and I love photographing them. So I've got this image of a motorcycle here, and I've got edits on top of this. Not saying they're great edits, but I've got edits on top of this that I like. So I have levels, I have a LUT applied, and I have curves applied to this as well as a photo filter. So if I edit this image in Photoshop, not in Lightroom, but in Photoshop, and I edit within layers to make an image look the way I want it, I have the option then to go to the File, Export, and then go down to Color Lookup Table. Now when I click on this, this is going to give me a new box that gives you a description, the copyright, things like that. This is where you want to set it to 33 for the grid points, because that's what the camera is primarily looking to use. And you want to select Cube, so C-U-B-E for this file. From there, I'm just going to click OK. And then now it's going to open up a new window for you to actually save this, and it's going to be able to save it out as a LUT file. So in this case, we're going to leave this as the file name because that's the one I created it off of. And then we're just going to click Save. Program's going to run, and it saves that LUT file out. So how does this actually work? So now, as you'll see, I have that file that I just created. This is a LUT based off the color profile that I chose in the camera. So that was based off standard color profile. I also have my SD card here that I plugged in, right on the root folder of everything. All I have to do is take this .cube file and load it right onto the card. Now, I can also go in and do things like take some of these other profiles that I really like to work with. These are not available in the public yet, but I'm hoping these things would be available at some point. You'll have to kind of hang on for those. And then let's go in for one of these. Let's take one of my other favorite looks. So I have 3 of these now on my SD card. From here, all I have to do is go in, and I want to eject that card. So now I take the card out of my computer, take this, put it into slot 1. You can do it in slot 2 also, but I'm putting it in slot 1 of the camera. Now what I'm going to do is just press Menu, and this is where the confusion has happened online. So to load looks into the camera, if you're coming from, earlier cameras that have Vlog View Assist, you would just add them in that menu. Now, on the newer cameras, S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, and the G9 Mark II, this is an option that you find called LUT Library. This is to load LUTs into your camera. So I'll click LUT Library. You'll see that I can load up to 10 into the camera, so it'll hold 11 total, counting the default one that we provide. I can click on Set 1, click Load, Card Slot 1, because that's the one I had here, and let's load in the one that we just created. So now that's complete. Let's go to Set 2, and we'll load in my other one here. And then let's go to Set 3, and we'll load in that last one. Now, again, these last two LUTs, these are not mine. These are created by Ted Forbes. I'm playing around with these to see how they look, how they perform. But he does make a version. The current thing that's available is for Lightroom and Photoshop and Capture One, things like that, presets in for those programs. So now what you do is go back into Photos, go to the LUTs, or your photo styles, and then now I can click on this and I can change the look that I wanted to apply. So now you can see here's that one that we created in the camera, but I have to remember one thing here. I want to change this back to standard since that's what I built it off of. So now you can see it gets a little more punchy, a little brighter highlight, harsher contrast in this. But say I don't want that. Say I want to come in and I want to change this to, say, this other look, this kind of Velvia emulation. So again, I have that kind of ability to punch in here and play around with them. I can change it to the 1930s one, which gets that real washed out look. Again, I can see how they want to play, if I'm going to like it or not. And then now I have that LUT applied. This is probably the biggest point to make about this, is that if you're playing around with color styles or color profiles and you want to start looking at LUTs, you have to kind of start to think of how you want to use the images overall. Because there is the actual photo option in this camera called real-time LUT. But if you're a photographer, you do not want to use this particular mode in these cameras. Real-time LUT, as it is set in these cameras, is based off of the V-Log color profile. Now, what that means is that when I take that image and I say I'm shooting RAW and I put it into RAW editing software, your image is going to look underexposed with the RAW software because it doesn't know what to do with it. V-Log and V-Gamut are exposed differently than a standard profiled image or something based in like Rec 709 or in photo style based in sRGB or Adobe RGB. So when you're loading them in, that's kind of where you want to think about it. LUTs that you typically see available online are generally going to be designed for V-Log and V-Gamut, because usually in the video side, that's what they've been built for. But as I just showed you, and I'll make sure that you have a link to it, a timestamp in this video, it is incredibly easy to create your own looks based on your editing style, how you like things to look, by using tools that we already commonly use. Now, if you don't use Photoshop, there are other tools out there that can let you do this in, say, like Lightroom, and then have it kick out a look for you. I think you have to pay for some of those options because they're plugins. And there are some other open source options out there that let you take an image and export a look out of it. So I encourage you to play around with it. It is a lot of fun, and you get a ton of control over the image that you want. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that if you are working with LUTs, you don't have the option to you don't have the option to basically take I completely just brain stopped working there. Grain. You don't have the option to work on a photo in Photoshop, add things like grain and other kind of effects like that, and have those translate over into the camera, because that's not information that gets carried on a LUT file. They're just lookup tables for color, color and contrast, things like that. But that's where you can use options like going in here, choosing things like the My Photo Style and changing to something like El Classic Neo, or if you want to build something off black and white, using something like Leica Monochrome, where I can come in and also do color filters. I can do black and white grain effect, that kind of thing. You would do that part of it in camera. So, really long-winded answer about that particular one, but I wanted to make sure to get to that because I've had a lot of people asking me questions about it. Let's see here. Maybe too complex, but could you show us how you set up the G9 Mark II for webcam-like operation using LUMIX Tether, I guess? Also, multicam via LUMIX Tether, can it be done wirelessly? I don't have the setup to do that today, just because I don't have the cables running from the computer for that. But it is something I can take a look at doing in probably a recorded stream, because we're going to have a couple of those in the coming weeks, between vacation, the holidays, CES, Yeah, I said vacation already. So there's going to be a couple different things there. So yeah, we'll kind of take a look and see if I can do that for you. Let's see here. David says, now that you can update the firmware for the camera on the LUMIX Sync app, will you be able to update the firmware in the lens update in the future? I don't know. That's a good question. I know to start with, the camera is priority for doing updates that way, but yeah, I'd have to talk with the team and see what the concept is for future plans on that. But it's a great suggestion, David. Let's see here. Doug also says, can you talk through the high-res mode on the G9 Mark II and the trade-offs for handheld high-res versus tripod high-res? Yes, I can. So, in the LUMIX cameras, you have, actually, let me do it with this first. So, this might be a little hard to see. So, this is my GH6. On the LUMIX cameras that have high-resolution shot mode, you'll see that you have an actual mode dial option here. Now, I have it selected on my GH6 here. It's the option right there that lets you put the camera into high-resolution shot mode. Now, once you are in that mode, and let me turn my G9 Mark II to that mode as well. Once you are in that mode, you're going to see the icon right there to your left looking at the screen. You're going to see it there that indicates that you're in high-resolution shot mode. Now, you're going to press the menu button, and you'll see an option here called high-resolution mode settings. When you click on this, and this is again G9 Mark II, you'll see you have the option to turn handheld high-resolution on. You have picture quality options, you have picture size options, as well as simultaneous record, shutter delay, motion blur processing. The difference between handheld high-resolution shot and tripod-based is down to a couple of things. One, if I turn handheld on, you're going to notice that motion blur processing is off. You don't have the option to change it. It's because when you do handheld, motion blur processing is working. It has to, because it has to accommodate for movement of the camera. But you also notice that you have full access to the 100 megapixel option from this mode. You also still have 50.5 megapixel as well. The difference is how these two systems work and the number of images that it uses to create the final higher resolution result. In handheld high resolution shot mode, it uses 16 images to capture the object or subject or landscape, whatever it is that you're photographing, to merge them into a 4 times resolution increase. Now, it is going to be more dependent with handheld high resolution shot on how stable you can be. Even though there is stabilization working, faster shutter speeds, moderate ISOs are definitely going to be your friend when it comes to working with handheld high resolution shot. If you're doing things like dragging shutter, or you're down, below maybe the 1 over focal length rule, you may get a little more variability in the result that you get, because high resolution shot for motion protection or motion correction is analyzing the entire frame pixel by pixel and saying, hey, between these 16 images, these 4 match up properly, so we'll use them. But when you get to an area where there's a big difference in it, it's going to select one of those images and then up-res it into that kind of area to get you the overall resolution. So handheld will be a little more dependent on how fast you can shoot and the type of subject. So for landscape work, for architectural photography, for maybe some like real estate, it's going to be perfect for that. Portraiture, it can also work incredibly well, especially if you're working with constant natural lighting and you're working with a faster shutter speed. So that's really just kind of the thing you have to remember there, is you want to shoot at a faster shutter speed. This is opposed to the tripod shot for high resolution. High resolution in the tripod shot mode is using 8 images to capture, because you don't have to compensate for the camera movement. Still does the same thing, but you have the option there to turn motion blur correction on or off. That's where you can say, hey, I see really fast moving water and I want that to pretty much replicate within the image. Though you have to remember that the trade-off there is that if you also have trees in the frame, those trees are going to be moving. When you flip that on, it's going to do the same thing. It does the analysis of all of the pixels, where they are in relation to the other 8 images that it took. Are they within the kind of area that they need to be so that they can be combined to then get you the image. Both of these modes are going to get you a couple of other benefits. That you at a given ISO, high resolution shot mode will look cleaner because you're basically patching out noise with actual image data. And you also get better general color fidelity out of the image when you shoot in high resolution shot mode. So that's going to be the same whether you're on a GH6, whether you're on a G9 Mark II, S5 Mark II, S5 Mark IIX, or if you're on the tripod modes, any of the other S series cameras out there. So hopefully that helped. Any word on Vericamera Pro line and LUMIX merging? Sounds like there was a short press release. The other one says on OOT, but any thoughts on April merger of Pro AV and PEAC? Sorry about the tongue-in-cheek simplification on Reddit if you saw that. So at this point, I don't have any comment or any information other than what was published in the press release that you see online. Yeah. As far as I know, nothing's changing. So I really wouldn't worry about it. If anything, always look on the plus side. Things like that can always be a very good thing for brands. Let's see here. Does LUMIX have apparel for the consumer purchase? Not at this time. It is something that I have been asking about. I know that my marketing team, we've been talking about it a lot. I would love to be able to sell merch. There are some weird things involved with selling merch, but it would be kind of cool because I know y'all love seeing the sweatshirts or the t-shirts that we have or the things that we use at trade shows for different looks. We hear you. It's just something that's kind of in the process, but I have no idea if or when we'll be able to do that. And if you see people selling merch out there that is branded LUMIX, it is not coming from us. It's bootlegged. Don't go near it. Especially because half of the time you see them online, they're all using the like decades old logos that we used to use. The G100D just came out. Do you have one? And could you speak about the OLED EVF? I do not have a G100D that I believe for now is out in Japan. I haven't seen one, but yeah, the viewfinder's been updated, or just the part's been changed out, and the USB port's been updated to a USB-C, though it is running at 2.0 speeds. Think of that more as just kind of updating into the modern, kind of spec. More people have USB-C connections. It's a much more common, general just connection across the board. But as soon as I get a G100D, if people want to have a stream about it, I will happily do it. I do really like the G100. I do have one that I carry around when I'm riding on my bike if I don't want to carry my bag and, all my other cameras with me. It's a fun camera to use. So, since getting the S5 II, I've not used my GH5 much. When I do, I sometimes accidentally press the display button and change the display. Is there a way of disabling the button to prevent this? There is. On the GH5, I think I can show you on this. It may be in a slightly different menu, but you would look for... Let's see if I can find it here. You would look in the menu for Operation Lock. In this case, Operation Lock Setup. When you go into here, you would want to make sure that lock is enabled for the display button. Once you have that kind of set in the menus, then you would go into the function button set or press and hold a button that you want to program for this. Go in here and then say, I'm going to change this button to Operation Lock. So now when I press that, since I primarily do photography with my cameras, when I press the video record button, as I've just said it, now it's locked, and if I try to press display, I get that notification that says operation has been locked. So that's something you could take a look at for the GH5. I'm like 99% sure the GH5 had that as well. I know all of the S series have it, but the S1 series has the physical switches for locking out settings. All right. Hap says, sorry, I'm truncating names. It's easier for me to just kind of go through, and I don't butcher names at that point. Hap says, is there a way to adjust the midtones for a single shot and not adjust highlight, shadow, or both? Currently at this time in the camera, you only have the highlight and shadow adjustments for the tone curve. There isn't really a mid-tone adjustment. You could theoretically use things like eye dynamic in the camera to do that. However, I would caution very, very severely to be careful with those kinds of adjustments. Those are altering how the camera's actually exposing the image. And you may find that overall the benefit of potentially adjusting the midtones kind of maybe offsets what you may want the rest of the image to look like. Because like I said, it's not just devoted to midtone. It's not like, you know, if you go into Lightroom or Photoshop or Capture One where you can select midtones and kind of play with them. So in camera, it's not really going to be the exact same there. So hopefully that helps. Al says, can I tie photo style profile to a custom profile? C1, C2, ... Yes, you can. The way you do that, for people who have never done the settings for setting up C1, C2, C3, the way you're going to do that is put the camera into the mode that you want to have saved into that. So right now I'm in aperture priority. Say I want to come in here and I want to change my ISO to always be at 200. I want to set my white balance. If I can touch the button here. I want to set my white balance to say incandescent. These are going to be horrible settings for this particular shot here. Say I'm all set there. And then I want to come in and I want to say, you know, change my color profile to, let's do something, let's do something kind of special here. Let's do like a monochrome. So now I want to take this and I want to save this into C1. So here is where I'm going to go down into, I believe it's setup. Shows you I rarely use C1, C2, C3, any things like that. I'm a very old school way of shooting with them. So you're going to go into the setup menu. You're going to go down to the settings option and you're going to click on save to custom mode. Now here I'm going to do set 1. I can do display title. I can rename this whatever I want it to be named as. So we're just going to leave this as custom mode C1. And then I want to save this and overwrite it. Now C1 is set with that color profile. But I also have other options here. I can go to custom mode settings. I can change how many I have available, so I can go all the way up to 10. I have the ability to see what is actually loaded. So in this case, do I want f-stop, shutter speed, and ISO being loaded in with that? Do I want white balance being loaded in with that? I can turn these off and make it that when I save them, shutter speed, ISO, and aperture are not being saved into it, or white balance is not being saved into that C1. This can be beneficial if you know that you change your settings a lot. So that's how you would actually set it up. But now what it's set up to do is that when I change from, say, C1 to C2, that color profile is assigned into that particular choice. Just remember that if you want to change it later, so if you're in that mode and say you change it out of monochrome into, say, standard, when you change out of that mode and go back, it's going to change back to L monochromes. Just kind of keep that in mind with those particular photo styles. Al also says, any camera settings file cross-compatibility between S5 II and S5 IIX, or do I have to recreate settings on each camera? At this point, you can't cross camera saved files between an S5 II, S5 IIX, or vice versa, or honestly any camera outside of the same model. Part of this has to do with the fact that not everything that's in that camera save file is available on the other camera. So it wouldn't know what to do, and you could error the system out. So for now, it just doesn't have the ability to read them out. You'll get an error that says can't read file. For those that don't know what we're talking about, you have the option in the settings menu to go to save and restore camera settings. So if, say, you've got, two G9 Mark IIs and you want to set one camera up, you get it like that perfect way that you love the way the camera's set up. You have all of your LUTs loaded, you have your custom functions set up, you've got your C1s through C10, programmed in exactly how you like it. Now you don't want to go through the process of loading it onto another camera. Or you've got a friend that loves your settings and you want to let them have a crack at what you've got set up as a kind of base to work with. You can click here, go Save Restore Camera Settings. Again, this is in the Setup menu under the Settings option. Now you can do Save, Card Slot, save the file. You can rename these files. You're limited on characters, but you can rename these files. And then now that file is saved onto the memory card in a specific folder that you can take that file, email it to your friend, put it on their card, put the card in their camera as long as it's the same camera model, and they can load them onto their card as well. Something I want to make sure is known by everybody. You'll notice on the newer cameras you have the option here to say keep settings while format. Make sure you turn this on. You don't want to run into a situation where you format the card and you had maybe 2 or 3 camera saved files on your card and you didn't have this selected, they get wiped. So make sure you do keep settings while format on under the Save Restore Camera Settings, and you can freely format your card after a job and you don't have to worry about, the camera clearing them out. It is also a good practice to, when you do this and save these files, save them on your computer somewhere. If you use the LUMIX Sync app, you can actually do this over Bluetooth as well, and it will save them to your phone in the app. So then you can just Bluetooth connect a different camera to your phone and load those settings on. So yeah, keep that in mind. Let's hear, Cliff, how do we get that shirt? Sorry, man. At this point, we don't have merch available. Thank you, YouTube. Jumped around. Doug says, if you can go through the AF focus modes, tracking, full, zone, still trying to understand when to use. Yeah, sure, of course. That's exactly what we're doing this stream for. So, in the cameras, we have tons of different focus options, right? You have tons of different, tracking mode, zone focusing. You have, you name it, there's pretty much an option on here. And with our cameras, you get to it by, and we're going to do this again with my GH6. You get this by, on the back of the cameras, you'll see typically in the middle of the AF selector, a little kind of grid icon here that lets you go in and say, press this, and it will open up the menu that we're going to take a look at. So if we go onto the camera that I actually have plugged in, we're going to click on this, and you'll see you get AF modes. Now, brief run through of all of these. Tracking. Tracking on our cameras is a mode that lets you pick a box and it will use visual information to attempt and track a target. This is a very kind of, I'd say, old school way of doing tracking. Modern cameras have gotten pretty good at doing this now. I think our camera's really good at it. But this is the more visual way. So this isn't using AI. This isn't using subject detection stuff. This is just saying, put something within this box, press and hold the shutter, and it's going to lock to that, put a box over that, within that target that you're going to see. The box may change sizes, but it's going to follow that subject pretty much throughout the entire frame, independent of you moving. Primarily, you want to use this when you're in continuous focus, so that the system can keep everything going while you're moving the camera. Then you have full area. Full area is the typical default that you see from many of our cameras, newer cameras like the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, and the G9 Mark II default to one area out of the box, because that does seem to be a little bit more of a normalized kind of expectation for a lot of people. But full area will take advantage of the entire frame to determine subject, to determine where it should focus. And the biggest thing to remember with this is that full area means that you are giving up your intent to the camera's interpretation for what you want it to focus on. This is the mode where subject detection options become a lot more necessary to make sure. So if you're a portrait photographer, if you're in video, if you're doing like wedding and portraiture, things like that, that's where you're going to want to make sure that you're coupling this mode with the detection options. Then you have zone, in this case, which is horizontal or vertical. You can swap it horizontal or vertical. Pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to kind of isolate out a zone for the focusing, whether it's going to be a horizontal line across the middle, or it can be moved up and down, or vertical, left and right. It's just kind of a slice through the frame. If you're trying to, work specifically for a certain type of framing that you want for an image. Then you have the zone option. This is a fairly common option for things like wildlife and sports. I use this for photographing motorcycles all the time. Basically, all of these are telling the system what grouping of either contrast areas, if you're on older cameras, or phase detect points to use, and only activate the ones that are within that box that you're selecting. Zone can be sized up and down into 3 sizes. You have the smallest, which is, obviously the smallest. You have kind of a mid, which goes a little more kind of oblong, and then you have wide, which goes much more oblong. Again, you choose these based on what works for your particular style. As I said, for motorcycle photography, I'm typically using the middle one, and then positioning it where I want my frame to be. This will let the system go that if I'm not dead center on my subject and they're moving within that box, it's going to keep track of them with the focus points that are within that box. Then you have One Area Plus. One Area Plus is the same concept as One Area, where, hey, this is the small little box that I want to use for focusing. But the plus indicates that it will use a larger area outside of that box, which you can see when you select it. It will use a larger area outside of that to assist in the focusing. Now, what that means is that if you're someone who grew up with, earlier DSLRs and you photographed, say, sports, you'd have that one point that you want to keep on your target, but it's very hard to sometimes keep that one point on the target. You'd want to let it use some of the periphery of that point to act as an area to kind of buffer so that it doesn't just completely jump to the background if that one point happens to go, say, off the shoulder to the bookcase behind me. One Area Plus kind of helps middle of the road mitigate that for use cases. Then you have One Area, very straightforward. It is literally one area. On the phase detect cameras, so G9 Mark II, S5 Mark II, and S5 Mark IIX, you now have the option to actually go one level lower than typical One Area. This will give you a single box, and then as you move it, you can kind of see it on the MacBook there. It'll give you a point array throughout the frame, which actually equates to the 779 physical autofocusing points on the camera, so that you can kind of really fine-tune and say, I want to make sure I'm using that particular focus point. And you'll see this by seeing the crosshair in the frame there. That's what indicates that you're using the actual individual point for it. When you go one larger, this is going to mix the points, and it lets you move a little more smooth. But you could go to a point where you're overlapping 2 of the AF points. So, there. Then you have Pinpoint. Pinpoint is a stills photography option. Pinpoint is pretty much what the One Area at its smallest with the crosshair gives you. However, Pinpoint does not work with continuous focus, and Pinpoint is really designed to say, hey, I'm going to look at this particular point, I want to change the box size here, and when I half press the shutter, it's going to give me a punch in for confirming focus. This is going to be what's perfect for situations like if I'm jumping into maybe some close-up photography, or you have a really tight area that you want to make sure your point is focused in. This just gives you that kind of added punch in to say, hey, that's where the point is, and you can visually kind of confirm that it landed exactly where you want it. So yeah, all of these modes on the newer cameras, the one part that I didn't mention, all of these modes except pinpoint, you have the option to go up, press up on the directional pad, and add your subject detection modes to this. You can press display, go through and actually change the options here. So on the G9 Mark II, we have motorcycle, car, animal, human. Under animal and human, you have the option to do eyes and body, or just body for animal. And then in human, you have the option to do eyes, face, and body, as well as just lock off for only eyes and the face. So you have tons of control with this. You get the little icon on there to tell you that you've got it activated, and then you're kind of good to go. Let's see here. When do you replace SD cards? After a certain time? Do you look for signs of degradation? Thanks for the cool streams. From Klaus. I make it a habit of SD card replacements happening every year. I shoot enough that I kind of factor in, between some paid work that I do and even my own kind of hobby level of photography, I factor in to know that at the end of the year, I'm going to retire the cards that I used, and I'm just going to go buy new ones. It's not the cheapest way to go about it, but also I value, and don't take this the wrong way, anyone that doesn't do this. I value making sure that my storage is always top shelf, because without it, it doesn't matter how good your camera is. If your card fails, you're kind of screwed. If it's that vacation, if it's that job that you're working on, buying cheap memory is one of the worst things you can do when you buy into a camera. You can run into all kinds of problems of the camera's locking up, files being corrupted, the card just breaking physically if it's got like the little lock levers on here. It's a little hard to tell on this one, but it's got like the little lock levers for locking the setup there. Sometimes those can break, and then that causes all kinds of problems. But yeah, so I make it a habit of every calendar year I replace my memory cards. I usually use anywhere between 2 to 4 memory cards throughout a year. The indications that I look at, if it comes time, or when maybe I may recycle a card earlier. If I'm using a card and I put it in the camera and it lags the camera. So that means I put it into the camera, I go to take pictures, it starts to, it takes a while to go from shooting to playback of the images. If when I put it in my computer, and I am a Windows user, if I get it on the computer and I get the little notification that software says, hey, we found a problem with this, do you want us to repair it? Will I replace it immediately when I see something like that? No. But if I go through, say, like a month and it's just constantly happening, I'll typically replace the card at that point. Now, in certain cases, doesn't necessarily mean that you have to up and replace the card out of pocket. Sometimes, this is where you buy from reputable locations for your memory. You buy reputable brands from there. My choice of memory cards is a mix between the SanDisk cards as well as ProGrade and Delkin. I use a good fair mix of all of those between just various different sizes. I always make sure that I'm using V90 cards or faster. I know there's a group of people out there that say, well, technically, V30 should be fine for an S5 Mark II. Yeah, that's cool and all, but I also want to account for when I'm offloading photos. I want it to be as fast as possible. I don't want to end up spending an extra hour offloading, 10,000 images off a card because I got to wait on how long it takes to offload. I'd rather have the fastest I can get. But then also, because I shoot with G9 Mark II and S5 Mark II X primarily now, I also use SSDs. So I use the ProBlade SSDs from SanDisk, and the Condor Blue handle for both photo and video use. Surprisingly, a lot more for photo use now, considering I don't really shoot in ProRes that often. So that's kind of the way to go. You should do it relatively often. You also want to make sure that you are caring for your media properly. Don't delete all of your photos on the camera and then just start shooting with it again. Deleting photos, whether you're doing it on the camera or you're doing it in the computer, doesn't actually delete anything. It just tells the controller, like, hey, you can overwrite this part. I don't need this file anymore in this location. The problem that happens there is after a while, you start to run into corruption. You start to run into problems where the card starts to slow down on you, stuff like that. It is a very good habit that when you are, say, done with a shoot, if you go on vacation, offload all of your photos, put them on your computer, and then put the card in the camera and format it. So formatting on our cameras is done under the setup option. Under the card, do card format, card slot 1, and then this is where you can format it. If you have a GH6 and you're using CF Express, the CF Express cards also have the ability to do a deep format. On that camera, when I'm using CF Express, or if I'm using my S1R that I have our full spectrum converted, the CF Express cards, I will format those standard, typically, and then usually about once every other month, I will do a deep format on them. All that's doing is fully resetting the tables inside of it to make sure that everything's actually clear on the card, to avoid future problems with memory. It's a very good habit to get into. It saves you a lot of headache down the road when you get a random situation where it says, like, hey, card speed's not fast enough. That could be part of the problem, is that if it wasn't managed properly. Card suppliers also provide software. ProGrade has a really good program for basically cleaning your cards. These are situations where it will actually completely rewrite over the card and then format it to really kind of kill any information that's on the card. And that just kind of refreshes the cycle. It'll make sure that your speeds are being kept up, all that kind of stuff. That's a really long answer for media, but as you can kind of tell, hopefully, I take media pretty seriously, because I've had stuff fail before, and it's not fun, especially if it's like a vacation or things like that. If it's a paid job, that's even worse. Let's see here. It says, sometimes I notice when I look through the viewfinder on my S5 Mark II, it adjusts the brightness of the viewfinder automatically. Is there a way to disable this? Viewfinder brightness on this. Actually, I'm not going to be able to show this because... actually, can I? I may have to use two hands for this one. Viewfinder brightness. When you go under the setup option, yes, I can. So if I... Right now, let me remove this. Right now, we're just looking at the rear screen, and you'll see I have monitor settings and monitor brightness. Typically, in all of my cameras, I just set monitor brightness to 0. If you change if you put your finger over the viewfinder, or you put your face to the viewfinder and you're looking through it, this same option you'll see changes to viewfinder. So viewfinder, I can come in and change what the balance of this is. I can change the hue, the contrast, saturation, the red and blue tints. But also, I can change LVF luminance. This is where, again, I change this to 0. That should take care of the challenge that you have at Adamant. That will mean that when you put the camera to your eye, you're not going to see kind of a blooming with the exposure, and you won't see it on the LCD either. Play around with those levels. Just remember that if you put it at +3 on either of them, it's going to be very bright. Your exposure is not really going to look as it should, because you're kind of overpowering the brightness of the viewfinder versus what your exposure looks like. That's why typically I start at 0. Also, when you go to full power on it, you are drawing more power from the battery for doing that. So keep that in mind. GH6 firmware update 2.5. Do you know which storage devices were improved? Release notes are really generic. It's just across the board. It's an improvement for all storage devices. SD, CF Express, SSDs. It just adds an extra level of compatibility, basically with various changes that happen in the media storage world versus where the camera storage world is. Every once in a while, you'll see an update come out like that where it basically says, this is what it was written at to understand and expect from cards. Cards may slightly change some specifications as they move on or as they get firmware updates or as new specs come out into the industry. And you have to kind of make sure that if the card spec does this, you have to make sure that in the camera you're compensating for it. So that's all that update did. Enrico says, I think these streams from Luke should get way more thumbs up. Come on, people. It's much appreciated. I love doing this, and I love being able to address y'all's questions. So just everyone asking these questions and tuning in every week is exactly what I love to see. So D Creative says, what autofocus settings would you recommend for the OG S5? It's again going to depend. It's going to highly depend on what you use the camera for in photo or video. There is, let me see if I can find it quickly here. We do have, I did find it. So, let me put this in the chat. So we do have a published autofocus guidebook online. I just dropped the link in the chat. What this guidebook is for is to kind of show you what the various settings do. Now, this hasn't really been updated for the PDAF systems because it's a little bit of a different world compared to the CDAF system or the DFD system we used. But it'll give you a couple of recommendations for different styles of shooting. It'll explain what the modes do, how they affect it. So I encourage you, D, to take a look at the link I just dropped in the chat. Go through that. You'll see there's an option for the S1R, S1, and S5. Technically, that's also available for the S1H in that series. So, yeah, definitely take a look at those. Alan says, for file naming on cameras without Cine settings, P00A star, can the A be changed to another letter? Camera without settings. Let me see. So this would be file settings. So what you would do here, it's not going to change the folder. This will change the file. So if I go into file settings, default you'll see is going to be P110 for these cameras. That's basically going to say that's the count up of the file. So if it says P110, it's going to be P110, and then usually the next letters are the actual file. You can go to username, and then you can change it, the last 3 digits of it. The P is the letter that you can't change. The P in this case, so right now you see it says P-A-N-A, so PANA. That is going to be dependent on what you have selected for your color space. So if I am in, I forget exactly where it is, because I rarely have to change it, actually. Though I did reset this camera for this screen. So the P is going to indicate whether or not you are in sRGB or Adobe RGB. So if I change my camera to Adobe RGB and then go into the file and folder settings, now you'll see that it's an underscore with ANA. That's so you can tell file by the file name whether that file is in sRGB or if it's in Adobe RGB. So that's the level of control you have for cameras outside of the GH6, since the GH6 has the Cine file naming function. He says, will we ever see LUT option for Vlog in LUMIX Tether? I'm not sure. We might. I honestly haven't had enough time to sit and really dig back into Lumix Tether. I use it less so now because I kind of just, with this setup, it's just, I have the camera set the way I do it. I don't really ever need to go in and change anything. But that software is always getting updates. And a lot of the updates are going to come from what more of the professional use space is using it for. So like multicam operations, things like that. But yeah, I can follow up and see about options for using log over or LUTs over vlog. Ashen says, Sean, you mentioned previously you used Ted Forbes presets. How did you manage to convert that into Photoshop and then into cameras? I'm struggling with that. So just to be clear, the versions I have are actually LUT versions of those. I did not convert them. I don't have any insight as to when or if Ted is going to be able to make those available. But I love the looks that he creates for Lightroom and Capture One. So I've been using them, and because I've talked with him a lot, he was kind enough to let me kind of play around with versions of them that are converted so that we can kind of play around and see how they interact on the camera. I love them. I think Ted's done amazing work on them. So in the meantime, if people haven't, go take a look at The Art of Photography. It's Ted Forbes on YouTube. Follow over to his webpage. Support him by getting his LUT packs, especially if you like old Kodak and Fujifilm film stock emulations. They're great in programs like Lightroom, and you can even use them in Photoshop. Yeah, definitely support him with that stuff because it's awesome what he's done for some of these looks. Let's see here. You mentioned Ted Forbes. Okay. Al says, what SD card speeds are actually recommended for 6K OpenGate MOV files? Manual mentions V30, but is this actually enough? The manual is going to tell you what the actual recommended or what the minimum is for the various different recording functions. That being said, like I started to kind of allude to, or actually I think I even just outright said it, when it comes to media, don't cheap out on media. V30 cards, yes, you can get them way less expensive. You can typically go higher in storage capacity on them for a better price. But in the end, it is not worth it in the end to save a couple of dollars on media and risk losing all the footage or risk slowing down when it comes to the overall, kind of process of capture to delivery. Even if it's, and honestly, I think it's even more important if you are more casual in it and you do photography and videography as a hobby. That being said, recommendation on the S5 Mark II, Mark IIX, G9 Mark II, and GH6. Across the board, I do not personally recommend anything below a V60. And that'll obviously depend. If you're going to be doing things like the 600 megabit per second codec on the S5 II and or the S5 IIX, that's where you're going to definitely need a V90. It's going to come into the correlation of what bitrate do you want to work at? Are you really pushing to the higher bounds of what they have? Ignore what people tell you online about, well, by the math, this card should be right. Yes, technically by the math, a V30 card should be okay for many of the codecs. It's not that simple because that's just not accounting for things like overhead. That's not accounting for inefficiencies in the card itself. It also doesn't account for things like degradation over time. If you use a V60 card or a V90 card, you are less likely to have problems with the card further down the road as speeds start to kind of slow down as cards degrade. That's why if you go back to the other section I just talked about, making sure you kind of manage your cards and keep them, fresh is a good idea. It kind of helps bring back that speed rating on the cards over time. But ultimately, I highly recommend use V60 bare minimum, V90 ideally if you've got the money to go for it. I know that not everyone has the necessarily the funding to just jump out there and go buy V90 or V60 cards, but in the end, it is the better kind of investment. It took me years to really kind of understand the logic of buy cheap, you're buying twice because it's going to crap out and you're going to have to buy another one. So yeah, hopefully take that maybe as some sage advice of just experience being in the industry. And you talk to a lot of professionals, they'll give you the same kind of logic. Let's see here. I got time for a couple more questions, and then I have to unfortunately end because we're at an hour and 20 minutes for the stream. If I don't get to your question right now, I will try to get to them in the comments after the video. So if I don't get to your question by the end of the stream, take your question, put it as a comment in the video after it's posted, and actually just post it as a comment. I will respond to them in the comments if I don't get to it today. Plus, that also helps us. The more you comment and interact with the video, the more it gets seen by YouTube and other people. So you'd also be doing me a huge solid by commenting on the video afterwards. Even if it's just a like, hey, just wanted to stop by and say hi. I love that. I love the interaction that you all give us. So let's see here. Is it possible on the S5 Mark II and G9 Mark II to turn off the LCD display function and use LCD screen as a touchpad for focus like it used to be on the GH4 and G9? So you have the ability that if you have your eye to the camera, so if you want to use the rear screen as, say, touchpad for focusing, you 100% still have that. You're going to do that by going into the operations page 1 under the custom menu here. You're going to go to touch settings, and then you'll see touchpad AF. So from here, this is where it gets way better than what we had on the older cameras. Now you have the ability to set offsets to say I only want the left bottom quadrant, left top quadrant, left half, bottom right, bottom top, or right top, whole right half, whole screen, or an exact. You have all of this control. So if you're going to have the camera to your eye and actually shooting and you want to use the touchscreen to move the focus instead of a joystick, set one of those that works best for you. If you're like me and I am right eye or am I right eye dominant? No, I am left eye dominant when I photograph. So that means I have my nose is going to be touching the top right of the LCD screen on the back or the OLED screen on the back. I can come in here and I can set it so that I am using, typically offset 4 is what I use. This way, as I'm using the camera like this, it's the bottom part in this corner is what will activate the touch AF. So that's how I can change my autofocus. This is in all the newer cameras. I believe it's in the S1 series, and then it's in the S5 series. It's in the G9 Mark II and the GH6 as well. So, does the camera have lost frame feature for video? No. Unfortunately, we don't have something like that in the camera. Mainly because it doesn't really happen. If it drops frame, technically if it's gonna lose frames, loss of frames is typically down to storage or a cable. That's usually what happens when the camera's gonna say like, hey, the video's gonna be missing frames. On things like the Blackmagic recorders or the Atomos recorders, you get that little notice that says like either, I think on the Atomos recorders you get the little triangle with the kangaroo in it. In the Blackmagic, I forget how the Blackmagic does it. I think it just stops recording, or it'll give you a little warning on there. Our camera, if it's going to drop frames or lose frames or any reason that the video file is going to have a problem with it, that's when you're going to get that notification on the screen that says video recording stopped due to card write speed. That is 99% of the time why you would get drop frames when it comes to the camera. Cameras themselves aren't really causing a problem. It's the media solution that usually is where that problem runs up. Let's see here. Harry says, hey, Sean, just recognized yesterday once that my S5 Mark II, the color red isn't processed correctly. In standard mode, dark reds are more like rosé. How can I fix that on board? If it's a difference compared to another S5 II that you have, you would want to send that into service, and have them take a look at it, because that kind of stuff, the only other thing that I could think of is to double check through all your color profile settings, make sure nothing's changed in there, because that can happen. First thing, usually do a camera saved settings, so save all your settings to an SD card, do a factory reset, test again, see how the reds are coming, how the colors are reproducing. If that fixes it, then it's most likely a setting somewhere in the camera that is altering the way the color is produced. If that doesn't fix it, then you want to contact service and send the camera into them, and describe what the issue is, and have them take a look at it. So, Cliff says, explain pixel refresh and what it does and when we actually need it. Should it be done often? If so, how often? So pixel refresh is an option in the camera that basically it takes a black frame at the settings that you have in the camera. That will then look at the entire black frame, determine where hot and stuck pixels are, and basically run through and say, create a map to say this is where the pixels are. You have to get rid of them for the noise reduction algorithms. I do it typically about once every 6 months on my cameras. I used to do it once every month, but it's not really necessary. It's more necessary in much older cameras, and it's more necessary if you're going to work in situations where, say, you have a really hot environment. Though with our cameras, we manage the thermals really well, so it's rare that you're going to run into problems where heat causes hot and stuck pixels, but in general, heat can cause hot and stuck pixels, and ultra long exposures can cause hot and stuck pixels. So if you are running into any of that stuff, I run it, like I said, about every 6 months. I'll run it on my camera. If you notice pixels being stuck. If you have dust and dirt on the sensor, that is not what pixel refresh will do. Is there any way to not have all 4 audio channels in post? At this point, Jeremiah, no. It's always going to have the 4 options, or the 4 channels for audio at this time. Kudo says, why does LUMIX cameras give you more slow-mo than other brands, 120 versus 180 and 240 versus 300? And does it hope to continue the tradition? This is that exact reason why Micro Four Thirds is not going anywhere, despite what the doomsayers say all over the forums. In the video world, Micro Four Thirds sensors, or the 4/3 sensors, Micro Four Thirds is the mount. The sensor itself is 4/3. In that realm, those sensors are, in a lot of times, multi-use, not just in cameras. A lot of times machine vision uses them because it's a great balance of resolution, detail, and most importantly, readout speed. The Micro Four Thirds sensor, or the 4/3 sensors, because they can read out so much faster than the full frame sensors, for the most part, caveat obviously needs to exist now because of global developments and things like that. Because they can read out faster means we can do things like 4K 120, we can do 1080 240, we can do 300 frames per second with the VFR functionality. In full frame, typically the architecture is usually a little bit further behind in that category, and it usually just, it's a size thing. It comes down to the larger the sensor is, the higher the resolution is, the more data you have to run through for readout speed. That's why full frame sensors typically have worse rolling shutter than you see in APS-C, and APS-C typically has worse or equal to what you see in 4/3. So that's typically why. And yes, of course, it's going to continue. Yeah, we're LUMIX, man. Gar says, what do you think about a function where the sensor closes every time you turn off the camera to protect it when you switch lenses? What do I think about this? It's in theory and in concept, I think it's a really cool idea. Personally, until I own a camera that has it, or if I ever own a camera that has it, I don't know if I would really get it. Mainly because, look, dust and things like that to protect your sensor, you are more likely to destroy the blades, the shutter blades, than you would to cause any actual damage to the sensor cover glass. Because remember, you're not actually looking at the sensor, that glass on there. That's your hot filter. That's your low pass filter if your camera's got one. That's the IR stack and the cover glass stack. You're never actually touching the sensor. So it kind of depends. It's a really cool concept. And I definitely see benefits for it. I personally would need to actually have a camera that has it to, I guess, maybe appreciate it more. Otherwise, when I change lenses, I face the camera down and change lenses, unless I'm doing it on a demo here just because it's easier. I'm not afraid to have rocket blowers or any kind of, like, compressed air, not compressed air. Do not use compressed air. Any kind of air blower here. I do sensor cleanings myself because I used to work in a retail shop where we did sensor cleanings, so I have a pretty good understanding of that. It's kind of just up there. Some people are going to love it. Others are just going to be like, it's okay. All right, and last question I'm going to take today, because it is an hour and a half that we've been running on this. This is one of the longest ones we've done. Great Thing says, will the S5 II get some 1080p down convert option for the HDMI port like there was on the GH5S? Some monitors don't allow 4K input. Probably not. In full honesty, probably not. Part of the reason there is that HDMI is a standard. There are communication protocols that are supposed to be followed across the board from device manufacturers that deploy HDMI devices and have HDMI certification. Those options and what it's supposed to do is there so that you don't have problems like that. If a monitor is not reacting because you give it an input from the camera that says, hey, I am a 4K signal at 30 frames per second, the HDMI and the device should be able to convert that. Is it perfect? No. Obviously, in the real world, that's not always the best case. It's not always what exactly actually happens in the real world. But as far as being a forced down convert, as far as there, I don't think the S5 II or 2X is going to get that. I have been proven wrong before when it comes to things like firmware and software and stuff like that, so I'm definitely not going to say that I'm infallible when it comes to that. But it is something that we can pass on to our engineering team. Let them know this is what some people are asking about. Let us go through the research to say, like, hey, let's kind of see if it's going to work that well. I apologize if you hear the dog. Someone's at the door. Yeah, so that's the last question I can take today. Everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. Y'all are freaking awesome with the questions, the conversations that you have. This community is just honestly one of the best that I feel exists in the market, in the industry. You guys are incredible. It's been an awesome year being able to do these LUMIX lives and connect with all of you pretty much every single week, whether we're doing a recorded stream or we're doing them live and having this back and forth. Truly, I am grateful for all of you in the chat, and hopefully you all learn something from these streams. You take something away from it each time. Hopefully, you see what we're trying to do here. At LUMIX, we know that community is an incredibly important thing, especially in this world, and we want to make sure that we offer as much as we can to all of you and the support that all of you deserve as people who have decided to invest your money into our brand. With all of that said, thank you all so much. We will be on recorded streams for the, let's see, next week will be a recorded stream as we are out for our holiday vacation. The following week on the 4th, it will also be a recorded stream since I will be out in Las Vegas at CES. So I encourage you, if you're going to be in Las Vegas, come by the booth, get into the show, take a look, join us there. We've got some cool stuff that's happening. The next actual live stream is going to be on January 11th. So we will be ringing in the new year, starting fresh on January 11th here on LUMIX Live. With that, again, everybody, I hope you have an awesome holiday season if you celebrate this time of year. If not, I hope you have an awesome day as well. Get out there, create some cool stuff, take photos, create videos, enjoy time with friends and family. And if you haven't already, this is where I would say, like, subscribe to the channel. It helps us grow. We've had some tremendous growth this year, and I definitely want to keep seeing that happen. If you know people that would be interested in these conversations or joining this community, let them know about these streams. Let them know that this community exists and that we're there to help all of you. Other than that, have an awesome rest of your day. Have an awesome weekend. And I will see everybody in the new year. Later.